Yeah, I call it a band, but on the album I play and wrote everything. So when you listen to it, it's just one dude, but I have an awesome line.
In late 2025, fans started posting the same comment under every new clip. That can't be him. The face looked sharper. The frame looked lighter. Even the way he carried himself on stage felt different. And that's what made it unsettling. Because Wolfgang Van Halen didn't just look like a guy who slimmed down. He looked like a guy who'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. And it didn't happen during a victory lap. It happened after the worst year of his life, after losing the one person who made the Van Halen name feel like protection instead of a target. Years earlier, people loved to reduce him to one word: Nepo. But if you track the timeline, his transformation wasn't some random glow-up. It was a slow rebuild, like he was putting himself back together piece by piece, while the world kept staring at the last name first. And the craziest part is, he eventually confirmed it wasn't a quick trick. He dropped about 60 pounds just by locking in his diet and taking care of himself. But what pushed him to finally do it wasn't vanity. It was survival. Rolling Stone Wolfgang didn't grow up with a normal, famous dad situation. His dad wasn't just a rock star. He was the blueprint. Eddie Van Halen wasn't a celebrity you saw on TV. He was a legend people argued about like scripture. And Wolfgang's entire childhood was basically lived inside that echo. The world didn't meet him as Wolfgang. It met him as Eddie's son, like his identity was a footnote on someone else's legacy. That kind of pressure doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in slowly, until every compliment feels suspicious and every mistake feels like proof. And when you're a kid, you start thinking you have two options: either run from the name, or let the name swallow you. Wolfgang tried a third route, quietly becoming so skilled that people would have to respect him whether they wanted to or not. But that route comes with a price. Because the better you get, the more everyone watches, waiting for the moment you slip, so they can say, "See, he was never real." And that's exactly the kind of atmosphere he grew up in, not just famous, but tested. Constantly. And that test was about to turn brutal. Here's the weird part. Kids raised around fame don't always understand it the same way outsiders do. If famous people are in your kitchen, you don't think it's fame. It's just Tuesday. But at some point, it clicks. For Wolfgang, the moment wasn't some dramatic red carpet memory. It was realizing his dad's face was everywhere. On albums, on posters, in collections people treated like holy artifacts. Suddenly, the last name wasn't just a last name. It was a brand the world felt ownership over. And once people feel ownership over something, they start acting like they get a vote in what you do with your life. That's when the comparisons begin. That's when the expectations get loud. And that's when your own personality starts feeling like an inconvenience. Because the world didn't want him to be Wolf. The world wanted him to be a sequel. But what people didn't understand is he wasn't trying to become Eddie. He was trying to become undeniable, quietly, privately, while everyone else was already writing his story for him. And the real twist is, the pressure didn't push him away from music. It pushed him deeper into it, because music was the only place he could control the narrative. From the outside, a rock star household sounds like pure magic. Guitars everywhere, famous friends dropping by, a private studio like a playground. But inside that kind of home, the noise isn't always fun. Sometimes it's chaos. Sometimes it's tension. Wolfgang grew up surrounded by rehearsals and riffs, but also by the kind of stress that doesn't make the highlight reels. And when family stability starts cracking, kids usually look for one thing: a place to disappear. Wolfgang didn't disappear into partying or trouble. He disappeared into instruments. That's what made him dangerous in the best way. He didn't just dabble. He got obsessed. He trained his ear. He learned by repetition. He locked into the details while his world shifted around him. And that matters, because it explains why he didn't crumble when the spotlight later turned nasty. By the time strangers started judging him, he'd already had years of practice living inside a storm and staying focused anyway. But the biggest myth people carry is that he had everything handed to him. In reality, the access only gave him the arena. He still had to survive the fight. And that fight was coming sooner than anyone expected. Most legacy kids fall into one of two traps. They either copy the parents so closely it feels like cosplay, or they reject the parents so hard it feels forced. Wolfgang didn't do either. He built himself in a way that was almost annoying to critics, because it made the easy insults stop working. He wasn't just a guitarist. He was the kind of musician who could jump between instruments and still sound tight, like the song was built around him. That versatility became his shield, because you can't call someone talentless when they keep proving you wrong in real time. And that's what people missed. Wolfgang wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was preparing for war. Not war with other artists, war with the audience's expectations, war with the comments, war with the fact that no matter how good he was, some people would still hate him for being born into the wrong last name. And once you accept that, it changes you. It makes you colder in public, sharper in private, and obsessed with earning respect the hard way. Because deep down, he knew something most fans didn't want to admit. The day he stepped into the Van Halen machine, he wasn't going to be welcomed. He was going to be judged. And what happened next turned that judgment into outright hostility. He didn't get eased into this life. He got thrown on stage and silently judged by thousands of people who wanted a mistake. That's the part fans forget. When you walk out with the Van Halen name, the crowd isn't neutral. They're measuring you against a myth. And if you're young, that pressure hits even harder because every wrong note becomes a headline in someone's mind. Wolfgang learned early that being calm is a weapon. You don't argue with the crowd. You don't beg for approval. You play so tight that the criticism starts sounding ridiculous. But that kind of discipline doesn't come from confidence. It comes from knowing you're not allowed to fail. And once he realized the room was waiting for him to crack, he made a decision. Stop trying to be liked and start trying to be undeniable. And that mindset would matter later, when the backlash went from comments online to actual danger in the venue. Then came the moment that turned normal criticism into a full-blown war. Wolfgang stepping into the bassist role after a long-time lineup era ended. That kind of change doesn't just annoy fans, it splits them into teams. One side sees the kid getting handed a spot. The other side sees the only person who could survive the spotlight. And Wolfgang got the worst version of it. People didn't just judge the decision, they decided he was the villain. Suddenly, it wasn't about how well he played. It was about what he represented. Legacy, change, and the fear that the band people loved was slipping away. And that's how a teenager ended up carrying adult-level hate. Most artists get time to grow in small rooms. Wolfgang got dragged into one of rock's biggest debates and told to prove himself immediately. But that still wasn't the scary part. The scary part was what that narrative did to crowds, etc. to ignore until it becomes physical. People love to talk tough behind screens, but with Wolfgang, some of that ugliness started showing up in real life. At shows, he wasn't just hearing insults, he was walking into rooms where people wanted to make a point. And once that switch flips, you're not just a musician anymore, you're a target. Imagine being young, stepping into arenas, and knowing the crowd might be looking at you for the wrong reason. That's the kind of stress that rewires a person. Because now you're not just thinking about playing tight, you're thinking about survival, focus, and not reacting. And Wolfgang didn't give them what they wanted. He didn't melt down. He didn't lash out. He absorbed it and kept playing. That's when the story shifts from lucky kid to something else entirely. A guy learning emotional control under fire. And the longer he held it together, the more the haters had to get louder to feel powerful. People love to say, well, he had the platform. Sure, but the platform came with a price tag. That 2000, every night is a final exam. Every clip becomes a weapon in someone's argument. And the more successful the tour is, the more people resent you, because success kills the idea that you don't belong. Wolfgang had to learn a brutal truth early. You can perform perfectly and still be hated, because some people aren't reacting to your talent, they're reacting to your last name. And once you accept that, you stop chasing approval. You start building armor. But he still wasn't done proving he could stand on his own. Here's what separates real respect from fan noise. Other musicians don't care about your story. They care if you can deliver under pressure. And Wolfgang's reputation in musician circles started shifting because of one specific type of moment, being thrown into difficult material and learning it insanely fast. That kind of skill is rare, and it's even rarer under stress. It's not flashy like a big solo. It's the boring, terrifying competence that makes bands trust you. And once that trust starts spreading backstage, the Nepo baby angle gets harder to sell. Because nepotism can get you in the room, but it can't make you useful once the door closes. Wolfgang became useful, reliable, sharp. The kind of player who makes everyone else sound better. And that's when the story gets interesting. Because instead of riding the Van Halen wave forever, he started taking steps that were almost risky, stepping outside the family brand and earning credibility elsewhere. And that's where his real identity began. The smartest thing Wolfgang ever did wasn't a public statement. It was moving like he didn't need one. He started stacking work that had nothing to do with Eddie's kid. Different rooms, different expectations, different people who couldn't be impressed by a last name. That's the only way out of a legacy trap. You'll go somewhere your name doesn't matter and see if you still survive. And he did. That changed the energy around him. Because now, even if fans wanted to reduce him to a storyline, the industry was watching something else. A guy with real stamina. The kind of musician who can tour, record, switch styles, and still show up consistent. And consistency is what turns potential into career. But while his public reputation was slowly leveling out, privately something heavier was building. Because no matter how far he ran from the shadow still lived at home. And eventually, home became the hardest part of all. A lot of artists monetized tragedy. They turned grief into merch, into branding, into constant content. Wolfgang didn't move like that. When Eddie's health declined and the end got closer, he didn't treat it like a storyline. He treated it like real life. And when Eddie passed in October 2020, the world expected one of two things. Either Wolfgang would disappear, or he'd cash in on nostalgia. Instead, he did the one thing that scares people who only understand fame. He set boundaries. He made it clear that some doors don't get reopened just because fans want them. And while the public was still processing the loss of Eddie Van Halen, the icon, Wolfgang was dealing with the loss of Eddie the father. That's a different type of grief, because you don't just miss the person, you miss the version of yourself that existed when they were alive. And out of that silence came a song that hit people harder than expected, because it wasn't written to impress anyone. It was written to survive. When Distance landed, it didn't feel like a normal single. It felt like a message, and the numbers backed it up. It debuted #1 on Billboard's Hot Hard Rock Songs chart. Billboard. But the bigger reason it mattered is what it did to the conversation. For years, critics tried to frame Wolfgang as someone borrowing greatness. Distance flipped that. Because grief doesn't sound fake when it's real. The track made people stop arguing about whether he deserved attention and start listening to what he was actually saying. And once you get that kind of moment, where the audience connects with you as a human, you can pivot your entire career. But Wolfgang didn't pivot into a nostalgia act. He pivoted into ownership. And that's where the next choice shocked everyone. He refused the easiest money move imaginable. Most artists would have taken the safest route. Run tribute shows, play the classics, print the tickets, keep the legacy machine humming. Wolfgang did the opposite. He shut the door. He made the point simple. Without Eddie, Van Halen isn't Van Halen. That one boundary told you everything about how he thinks. He wasn't trying to inherit a brand. He was trying to protect something sacred. And that decision is rare, because it means choosing long-term respect over short-term hype. But it also meant something else. If he wasn't going to be the guy continuing Van Halen, then he had to become the guy building something new. Not just another side project, not a hobby. A real identity. And that's where Mammoth stopped feeling like a solo experiment and started feeling like a statement. Still, even with that clarity, he was about to get dragged into drama again, and it would test whether his new confidence was real. Even as he built his own path, Wolfgang kept getting pulled back into the old chaos, especially whenever former band dynamics resurfaced in public. In a Rolling Stone interview, he described being a punching bag and talked about the way certain public rants and claims turned him into a target yet again, like people couldn't stand seeing him grow up. Rolling Stone. But what's interesting is how he responded. He didn't act like a teenager anymore. He spoke like a man who's done letting strangers decide his worth. That shift, quietly refusing to play the victim, was the beginning of the new Wolfgang people noticed in 2025. Confidence is when you stop explaining yourself. And around that same time, his life started stabilizing in a way the public didn't expect. Not in music, in something more personal. In October 2023, he married Andrea Alsop at their home in Los Angeles, surrounded by close friends and family. It was intimate, warm, and deeply tied to his dad's memory. He walked down the aisle with his mom Valerie to 316, an instrumental Eddie wrote for him. People that detail matters because it shows what he values: family, meaning, and keeping Eddie present without turning him into a marketing gimmick. But the uglier side of fame still followed him. In that same Rolling Stone conversation, Wolfgang talked about how people even flooded wedding posts with cruel comments about his appearance. Rolling Stone. And that's the moment you realize something. The internet didn't just want to critique his music. It wanted to control his self-esteem. But instead of shrinking, he took that energy and did something that would make them even madder. Wolfgang has always hinted he's an anxious person, but one story makes it feel painfully real. A severe panic attack on a flight while he was heading to open for Metallica in Mexico. He described vision closing, sweating but freezing, your body basically betraying you. Rolling Stone. That wasn't just a scary moment, it became fuel. It shaped the themes of the end, the feeling that everything is collapsing and you're trapped inside your own head. And here's what's wild. A lot of people assume transformation starts with motivation. For many people, it starts with fear. A moment where your brain says, "This isn't sustainable." Wolfgang didn't just write about that feeling. He started building his life around escaping it. More control, more routine, fewer self-destructive habits. Which leads straight into the most visible change fans couldn't stop talking about. When Wolfgang finally addressed his weight loss, he didn't sell it like a miracle. He said he'd lost around 60 pounds over roughly a year and a half to 2 years, mainly by eating healthier and taking care of himself, emphasizing that diet mattered even more than exercise. Rolling Stone. That framing is important for retention because it's not a glow-up story. It's a control story. He wasn't trying to win approval. He was trying to feel stable in his own skin while touring and performing an active, exhausting job. And once he started locking in, the results became impossible to ignore. The same people who used to call him names suddenly acted shocked he changed, like he wasn't allowed to evolve. But he did. Quietly. And the timing lined up with another public move that symbolized the same idea, stripping away extra weight, even in his branding. In 2025, the band name shortened from Mammoth Guitar.com. That might sound small, but it's actually huge. WVH is basically a billboard that screams Van Halen Kid. Dropping it is him saying, "You can listen without the label." He even said the longer name was a mouthful, and that he already called it Mammoth at shows anyway. Now it was official. Guitar.com. So, between the physical transformation and the name change, the message was consistent. Fewer crutches, fewer explanations, more ownership. And then, out of nowhere, he took a detour that nobody saw coming, into a pop culture moment so bizarre it almost sounds fake. Wolfgang playing on a rock record? Normal. Wolfgang showing up on Barbie? That's the kind of thing that makes even haters pause. He played guitar on I'm Just Ken, a Ryan Gosling-sung track from Barbie, alongside Slash, with Mark Ronson involved. Billboard. And the backstory is even better. He was recruited after meeting Ronson at the Taylor Hawkins tribute concert and hitting it off. Billboard. That moment mattered because it proved something. Wolfgang wasn't trapped in a classic rock museum. He could step into modern pop culture and still bring real guitar energy without looking desperate. That's a flex. And once the public saw him in that lane, his identity expanded overnight. But the real core of 2025 wasn't crossover hype. It was him building a heavier, sharper era and putting a name on it. When the end rolled out, it felt like a statement record, tight, heavy, and built like a live wire. Rolling Stone even described it as sounding pretty damn live, despite Wolfgang being the one-man engine on guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. Rolling Stone. And the themes weren't random. Anxiety, pressure, that feeling of the walls closing in. He wasn't hiding it anymore. Rolling Stone. That's what makes this era high retention. It's not just new songs. It's a storyline where the music matches the life. You can hear the panic, the anger, the boundaries, the confidence, all in the same package. And when you connect that to the weight loss and the name change, it starts looking less like separate events and more like one long decision. Reclaim control. And the album details locked the timeline in place. The End landed October 24th, recorded at 550, produced by Michael Elvis Basquette, with Wolfgang handling the full one-man band load again. Ultimate classic rock. And the track list reads like a progression from identity to confrontation. One of a kind. The End, Same Old Song, The Spell, I Really Wanna, and more. Ultimate classic rock. Even that Same Old Song title hits different when you think about the storyline, because Wolfgang's entire career has been people trying to force him into the same old narrative. Same accusations, same comparisons, same drama. The difference now is he's not reacting, he's steering, which sets up the most satisfying part of the video. Why fans said he looked unrecognizable in 2025 wasn't just the weight, it was the posture, the energy, the way he finally moved like he didn't need permission. When people say unrecognizable, they act like it's only physical. But the body is usually the last chapter, not the first. The first chapter is mental, choosing discipline over chaos, choosing routine over spiraling, choosing to stop feeding the comment section. Wolfgang's own words about losing around 60 pounds make it clear it wasn't a gimmick, it was locking in, focusing on healthful eating, and treating his body like part of the job. Rolling Stone. So when he hit stages in that era looking sharper, it read as confidence, like he'd finally reclaimed his space. And for longtime watchers, that's the real twist. The same kid people mocked for years became the guy who stopped caring if they approved. Not because he got lucky, but because he got tired. And tired can turn into discipline fast when you decide you're done being controlled. In that same Rolling Stone conversation, Wolfgang talked about how he's not a kid anymore. He's a grown man with a marriage and a third album, and he's done being treated like everyone's target. Rolling Stone. That line hits because it's the exact opposite of his early career energy. Early Wolfgang had to be careful. Careful with reactions. Careful with what he said. Careful not to fuel drama. 2025. Wolfgang sounds like someone who learned a brutal lesson. If you spend your life trying to satisfy people who already decided to hate you, you'll never live. So he stopped negotiating with the narrative. He built Mammoth into what he wanted, dropped the extra initials, got healthier, wrote heavier, and let the music speak. And once you see that pattern, the final point of the story becomes clear. The transformation wasn't about losing pounds. It was about losing chains. If you only look at the before and after photos, you miss the story. The real transformation was him choosing boundaries when nostalgia demanded access. It was him turning anxiety into art instead of hiding from it. It was him making Mammoth his identity without needing WVH as a crutch. Guitar.com. It was Distance, debuting at #1 and proving he could make people feel something without borrowing his dad's spotlight. Billboard. And it was him surviving the kind of arena pressure that would crush most teenagers on a tour that grossed over 93